You're listening ad-free on Amazon Music. In April of 2007, a 31-year-old woman woke up from a nap on her couch and rubbed her eyes. But instead of feeling rested and refreshed, she felt even worse than when she'd gone to sleep. She had a pounding headache, and the light that was coming through her window seemed impossibly bright. Her mouth was dry from thirst, and hunger pangs racked her stomach. The woman stretched and sat up. She was sore all over. It hurt just to reach for her phone on the coffee table. She turned her phone on, and when she saw the time and date, her eyes went wide. She'd slept for 53 hours straight. The woman tried to resist the fear that was now rising in her mind. She hadn't had anything to eat or drink in days. Her body had been wasting away while she slept, and she'd been powerless to break free. If this happened again, she might never wake up. From Ballen Studios and Wondery, I'm Mr. Ballen, and this is Mr. Ballen's Medical Mysteries, where every week we will explore a new, baffling mystery originating from the one place we all can't escape, our own bodies. If you enjoyed today's story, please bring a to-go container to the Follow Button's wedding and use it to pack up the entire cake before the bride and groom have any. This episode is called Sleep Addict. In the fall of 2005, 29-year-old lawyer Anna Sumner leaned her elbows against her large wooden desk and stared at her computer screen. It was hard not to let her mind wander. She could see downtown Atlanta, Georgia, right from her office window. Anna yawned and stretched and then forced her eyelids to stay open. It was already 5 p.m., but she still had an important brief to finish before she could go home. Her attention wandered again, this time to the framed diplomas that hung on her wall. She had an undergraduate degree from Princeton, and she had received her law degree from Duke. She'd studied very hard in school and now had worked her way up the ranks at a very prestigious law firm. She was proud of everything she'd accomplished. Anna leaned back in her chair and kicked off her high heels. She was exhausted. Then again, she was always exhausted. In high school, she used to skip hanging out with friends just to go to bed early, which left her feeling totally isolated. During college, she routinely skipped breakfast to sleep in, and then showed up to class so hungry she couldn't even focus. Once, she'd flown cross-country for a friend's wedding, and then accidentally slept through the entire thing. Finding the energy to get through law school had been a constant struggle, and it was even harder as a young lawyer at a big firm where so much was expected of new people. Sometimes she feared that her constant fatigue was damaging the career she had sacrificed so much for. It was beyond frustrating. Anna had slept for at least 12 hours the night before, yet here she was, not feeling rested. It was like she was moving through a fog at all times. She always needed more sleep, but she knew she needed to keep working. Anna stood up and shook her arms, trying to get her blood moving. She opened her eyes as wide as she could. She shook her head back and forth and sat back down, determined to finish her work. But as soon as she started to type, her eyelids grew heavy again, and Anna nodded off, her cheek resting on the keyboard. The next thing Anna knew, she was slowly waking up. Her back ached from being hunched over in her chair. Her computer screen had gone to sleep too. She shook the mouse and the screen lit up, and she looked at the time. It was 6 a.m. Anna had just slept for 13 hours. She was completely disoriented, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and her brief was not finished. Anna immediately felt a knot form in her throat. She had been successfully hiding her sleepiness problem ever since she was a teenager when it began. She'd always been able to arrange her schedule to accommodate her constant need to sleep. But now that she had a job with a lot of responsibilities, she just didn't have that same flexibility. Anna had always prided herself on having a good work ethic and self-control, but now she realized that this was something she really just couldn't control. Sometimes when Anna felt really tired, she would think to herself, if I don't sleep right now, I feel like I could actually die. She knew that was not normal. This problem had gone on long enough, and it wasn't going to get better unless she sought out some help. A few days later, Anna drove to the Emory Clinic Sleep Center in Atlanta. It was inside an old, faded building undergoing significant renovations. In fact, there was still construction going on outside. Anna plugged her ears as she walked past jackhammers slamming into concrete. She checked in, and a few moments later, a gray-haired, round-faced doctor walked her back to a large exam room with chairs and a bed. He adjusted his glasses and then introduced himself as Dr. David Rye, the lead neurologist at the clinic. He motioned for Anna to take a seat and asked her about her symptoms. And she told him that she basically craved sleep the same way a drug addict craves a fix. No matter how much she slept, she never felt rested, and the constant exhaustion was totally debilitating. Dr. Rye nodded understandingly and suggested they begin with a very basic test. He asked Anna to simply take a nap, right there in the exam room. And so Anna laid down on the bed. She could still hear the loud construction noises going on outside, but it didn't bother her. Within moments, she was asleep. But just a few minutes later, Dr. Rye shook her awake, and then he diagnosed her with a disorder called hypersomnia. This is a catch-all term for extreme, unexplained sleepiness. It's thought that up to 5% of the entire population experiences it, though rarely at the level Anna was. So while it was a diagnosis, it really wasn't that specific. But for Anna, who'd never seen a doctor for her sleep problems before, having any diagnosis was progress. And she was even more optimistic when Dr. Rye suggested a treatment plan. He explained that in most cases, extreme tiredness is caused by a lack of energy-promoting chemicals in the brain, with names like dopamine and norepinephrine. It's like having a car with no gas in the tank. So he prescribed stimulants for Anna. These medications increase the level of these energy-promoting chemicals the same way that caffeine does. For patients like Anna, it can feel like they have a full tank of gas again. And Anna was so excited about her stimulants that after she left the doctor's office, she went straight to the pharmacy. When she got there, a pharmacist handed her a paper bag with a couple of prescription bottles inside, and Anna didn't waste any time getting her first dose. Sitting in her car in the parking lot, she opened one of the bottles, shook a pill into her hand, and swallowed it. She couldn't wait to feel better. A few months later, Anna grabbed a stack of papers off the desk in her office. Her hands shook slightly as she slipped the papers into her shoulder bag. She stood up from her desk chair, and suddenly a wave of nausea washed over her. She'd taken her prescription stimulants that morning and had been taking them every day since Dr. Rye prescribed them. In some ways, the stimulants were working. She could get through a full day of work without needing a nap, but the side effects from the medication were terrible. She felt jittery and sick to her stomach, like she'd had way too many cups of coffee. She was losing weight because she never had any appetite. And even though she had felt kind of okay for a while on this medication, she was now starting to crave sleep again. As she walked outside and unlocked her car, all Anna could think about was getting home and going to bed. She got into her car, pulled out her phone, and called Dr. Rye. She told him about the side effects she was feeling and now how her craving for sleep was starting to come back. Dr. Rye assured her that this was actually normal. He told Anna her body was building up a tolerance to the drugs, and he'd simply prescribe her a higher dose. Anna was nervous about this. The stimulants were already giving her such bad side effects, and she thought taking more would really only make her feel worse. But at the same time, the medication was the only thing allowing her to make it through the day. So Anna agreed to the higher dose. She hung up, drove to the pharmacy, and picked up more medication. One year later, on a Friday in April of 2007, Anna was wrapping up her work for the week when the phone on her desk rang. It was her boss. He wanted her to come up to his office before she went home. Anna's hand trembled as she set down the receiver. She wasn't sure if the trembling was from a side effect of the stimulants or from nerves from what her boss just asked her to do. She knew what this conversation was going to be about, and she'd been dreading it for months. Anna had begun missing entire days of work without warning and without explanation. Even though she was constantly taking all of her stimulants, it wasn't uncommon for Anna to still literally sleep days away. Sometimes she'd go to bed and sleep for 20, 25, or even 30 hours straight. It didn't matter how many alarms she set either. Anna slept through all of them, only waking up when her body finally let her. Anna got up from her chair and her legs felt heavy. Even now, with adrenaline coursing through her body, all Anna wanted to do was sleep. It took all her strength to trudge down the hall to her boss's corner office. She knocked on the door, and then, in a somber tone, her boss asked her to come inside. Anna sat down across from his desk and tried to stay composed. She felt angry at her body for betraying her. She'd put in so many years of hard work, and she was sure that it was all about to slip away. But Anna's boss didn't fire her. He reassured Anna that he valued her contributions, but he was really concerned about her health. Though Anna rarely talked about it, her boss was quite aware of her sleep issue, and so he recommended that she take a 6-month leave of absence so she could get to the bottom of it. Anna didn't want to do this. She wanted to keep working, but she knew that taking this leave of absence was probably the right thing to do. If she couldn't be consistently relied on, she wouldn't be helping the firm, her clients, or herself. So she thanked her boss for understanding and promised to do everything she could to get back to work soon. The next afternoon, Anna was lying on her couch at home, trying to make sense of her struggles. She sipped on a cup of coffee and tried to watch TV, but as usual, she couldn't stop herself from nodding off. This time, though, waking up was worse than ever. Her head was pounding and the light coming in through the blinds seemed overwhelmingly bright. She had sharp hunger pangs in her stomach, and her joints felt stiff, and her muscles were weak and shaky. It took all her effort just to roll onto her side. She saw the TV had shut off, and the cup of coffee she'd just been drinking was now totally cold, and the cream inside of the coffee was clearly rotten and curdled at the top of the cup. Anna was confused and grabbed her phone on the coffee table, and she checked the time and date. And what she saw literally did not seem possible. According to the time, Anna had just slept for 53 hours straight. It had been over 2 days since she'd laid down on the couch, but it felt like, a second had passed. Staring at the date and time on her phone, she felt sick. Her symptoms were really starting to frighten her. How long would she sleep the next time? A week? More? How could she live anything like a normal life if this was what happened to her? She called Dr. Rye's office immediately, and he thankfully had an immediate appointment available. As Anna dragged herself off the couch and walked out to her car, she felt weak and clumsy. Walking was like trying to pull her body through sludge these days. She gingerly lowered herself into the driver's seat and then drove straight to the Emory Clinic Sleep Center. Before long, Anna was in that familiar exam room, sitting across from Dr. Rye. He seemed surprised to see her, but when she told him about falling asleep for 53 hours straight, his eyes went wide. Dr. Rye knew that spending so much time asleep could actually be dangerous. It meant Anna wasn't eating, drinking water, or exercising for days at a time. In the long term, this could lead to malnutrition, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. If she wasn't able to take care of herself, her body would eventually quit working. However, Dr. Rye said he did have an idea for what they could do next. It was a last-ditch effort and something he would not recommend unless it was absolutely an emergency, and clearly this was that. There was a test that could help them figure out what was causing her to sleep so much, but for it to be accurate, she needed to stop taking all the stimulants he'd been prescribing. Anna leaned back in her seat after hearing this. She knew the stimulants weren't perfect. No matter the dosage, she always needed more, and she was still sleeping way too much. But at the same time, the idea of not taking them scared her. If she could sleep for 53 hours with stimulants in her system, what would happen to her without stimulants? But in Dr. Rye's opinion, getting rid of the stimulants might be the only way to figure out what was happening inside of her brain. It would take about a month for the drugs to clear her system, so the doctor scheduled an appointment for a month from then, in May. Until then, the doctor explained to Anna that she really needed to be careful. Once she stopped taking these stimulants, she shouldn't drive, just in case she fell asleep behind the wheel, and she should have someone looking after her, making sure she ate, drank, and moved around every day. Anna realized that what the doctor was saying was, without these stimulants, she could not live alone anymore. And so, after she made it home from the clinic, she called her parents, who lived in Mississippi, and she told them she needed their help. Her parents immediately agreed, and her mother said she'd come to stay with Anna in Atlanta for as long as she needed. Anna was relieved to hear this, but at the same time, she was so tired she could barely function. She felt like she was literally sleeping her life away. A month later, in May of 2007, Anna's mom helped her get into the passenger seat of her car. With no stimulants in her system, Anna felt even more lethargic and totally confused. All she knew on this day was that they were going to the sleep clinic to see Dr. Rye. The whole ride, Anna sat with her head leaned against the window, watching trees and buildings blur together as she slipped in and out of consciousness. When they got to the Emory Clinic Sleep Center, Anna felt so stiff and heavy that her mom had to help her get out of the car. Anna could barely keep her eyes open as she leaned on her mom's arm, and then she shuffled her way into the clinic, feeling like she had cinder blocks stuck to her feet. Dr. Rye met Anna in the waiting area and walked her back to an exam room. They sat down, Dr. Rye in a chair and Anna on the bed. And as soon as Anna was sitting down, she started to feel herself beginning to fall asleep. As she struggled to stay awake, Dr. Rye explained the procedure they'd be doing that day. He said sleep was largely controlled by a person's brain. The brain uses nerves and chemicals to send messages through the rest of the body, and if the balance of these chemicals is thrown off, it could make someone sleep far too little or far too much. Dr. Rye thought this could be what was happening to Anna, but he needed to analyze the fluid inside her spinal cord to be sure. This meant he would need to insert a needle into the base of her spine and withdraw some of the fluid, a procedure known as a spinal tap. Dr. Rye instructed Anna to lay down on the bed in the fetal position with her back facing him. Then he injected a local anesthetic near her spine, and Anna's back went numb. Then Anna began to feel pressure and a burning sensation as Dr. Rye inserted the needle into her spine and removed a sample of her cerebrospinal fluid. When the procedure was over, Dr. Rye told Anna it would take a few days for the results to come back. And so Anna stood, her back numb and her whole body exhausted, and she shuffled out to the waiting room where her parents were sitting. Then the parents helped Anna out to the car, they got inside, and they drove back to Anna's house in Atlanta. Anna barely made it inside before she collapsed into bed and fell asleep. A few days later, Dr. Rye was getting ready to leave work to head home when one of his assistants rushed inside and told him that the results of Anna's test had come in. Dr. Rye adjusted his glasses and then peered down at the data on his computer screen. He reviewed the chemical breakdown of Anna's cerebrospinal fluid, and what he saw shocked him so much that he called over other doctors to take a look. Every sleep specialist at the clinic was totally surprised. The results were so bizarre that one doctor even started laughing at the absurdity of the numbers they were seeing. They had literally never seen anything like this. But while the other doctors stood in disbelief, Dr. Rye felt a mixture of hope and unease. He had seen results like this before, in an Italian sleep study from the 1990s. In that study, a group of people who had symptoms similar to Anna's were given an experimental drug that cured their sleepiness. It was a drug that Dr. Rye had on hand, which meant he might be able to use it to cure Anna too. But there were problems that made Dr. Rye hesitant. That Italian study had been discredited after the research was found to have some serious issues. Plus, the drug used in that study to cure their sleepiness was never approved by the Food and Drug Administration to treat sleep disorders, and it could cause bad side effects like seizures, so giving it to Anna would definitely be a risk. But faced with Anna's spinal tap results, Dr. Rye thought the risk was worth it, and so he called Anna and told her that he might be able to treat her sleepiness, but they need to do one more test. The next month, in June of 2007, Anna came back to the Emory Clinic. She'd been off the stimulants now for 2 months, and it felt like her body was close to shutting down on her, like she'd never be able to do anything except sleep again. Every footstep she took was a total battle. She dragged herself into the exam room and crawled into the bed. She felt a nurse lift her arm, swab near her wrist, and then jab her with an IV needle. Anna was vaguely aware of other movement in the room. Multiple nurses were standing by, just in case Anna had a bad reaction to the drug, like a seizure or worse. Anna watched as Dr. Rye rolled a screen into the room. Everything looked slightly blurry to her. She heard Dr. Rye say they were doing a test to measure her brain's reaction time, and then he put a remote in her hand and told her to press the button as soon as she saw numbers appear on this screen. Anna tried to follow his instructions, but at the same time, she felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness, and so when a number popped up, she would press the button like she was told to, but she could tell by the look on Dr. Rye's face that she was not doing a good job. After the test was over, Dr. Rye told Anna that her reaction times were similar to someone who had just been up all night, or who had been drinking very heavily. And so now that they had these control results, they could try the medication that Dr. Rye hoped would help her. Anna watched as Dr. Rye put something into her IV bag. The liquid dripped through the tube into her arm and into her bloodstream. But Anna didn't feel any better. Her head felt like a lead weight. Her eyes were so dry that they burned, and the whole room seemed foggy. It took everything in her not to slump over and let her eyes close. For a moment, she had a horrible feeling that this new treatment was not going to work. She would never be able to hold a job or even live by herself again. Then she heard Dr. Rye's voice at her side saying he was going to try a higher dose of this drug. Anna struggled to take a deep breath. She waited for something to happen. Then her eyelids snapped open. The room came into focus, and Anna felt like she could hear and see again, and she didn't feel a desperate urge to sleep. Dr. Rye ran the reaction time test again, and Anna didn't have to work to focus on the screen. The reflex test that had seemed impossible before felt very simple now. When they were finished, Anna looked up at Dr. Rye, close to tears, and she told him she felt alive. For the first time in her adult life, Anna felt truly awake. Dr. Rye watched Anna for a moment. In all the time he'd known her, he'd never seen her look this alert. She sat up straight, her eyes were clear and focused, and she was smiling at him. He couldn't help but smile back. It was incredible to see how much of a difference this drug was making. Dr. Rye sat down next to Anna and told her that he had never seen a patient like her before. Her brain was basically full of naturally occurring anesthesia. He explained that there's a chemical messenger in everyone's brains known as GABA, G-A-B-A, that helps regulate sleep. Many sleep aids and drugs used for surgical anesthesia make the brain respond more strongly to GABA. The stronger the response, the sleepier a person gets, Dr. Rye said. And the reason Anna's doctors were so shocked by her test results was because her naturally occurring GABA activity levels were as high as a person who was about to go into surgery. Every day of her life, 24 hours a day, Anna was walking around with the same level of sedation as a person about to have all their wisdom teeth removed. Dr. Rye watched Anna's jaw drop as she realized that she hadn't just been tired for most of her life. Her own brain had been literally knocking her out. This drug that Dr. Rye had given her was called flumazenil. Usually, flumazenil is used in hospitals to help people who are overdosing on sedatives or having trouble waking up from anesthesia. It's an emergency antidote for people whose GABA activity is too high. So for Anna, whose GABA activity was always too high, flumazenil made her brain function like a healthy person's brain. But the FDA never approved flumazenil for excessive sleepiness. The drug only came as an intravenous medication for use in hospitals, and the effects wore off really quickly. Anna would need to have intravenous injections every few hours to stay awake, and that just wasn't possible from a practical standpoint. So Dr. Rye worked with Anna and the drug maker over the next 8 months to get an exemption from the FDA that would allow her to take a daily flumazenil pill to prevent her sleepiness. The medication completely changed Anna's life. She's since gone back to work, been promoted to partner at the big prestigious law firm in Atlanta, and is enjoying what she calls, quote, the luxury of life. Morgantown, West Virginia is this beautiful place nestled at the bottom of this huge mountain range called the Green Mountains. It is a big-time college town, as the famous West Virginia University is located there, and so during the school year, the town is full of young people, and during the football season, the town is absolutely buzzing with excitement. But the college is not the only reason people live in Morgantown. Lots of families choose to live there because there's so much to do year-round. Also, it's relatively safe, and in general, it's an up-and-coming place with new shops and restaurants and museums popping up every single year. But despite all of that, Morgantown is also known for something absolutely terrible, and that is the story of Skylar Neese. In 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese was a sophomore in high school in Morgantown, West Virginia. She was a straight-A student, and she worked part-time at a Wendy's, which is a fast food restaurant chain, and by all accounts, she was extremely well-liked by her peers, her co-workers, and had many, many friends. She was the only child of Mary and David Neese, and they absolutely adored her. David, in particular, who was this big, burly man's man, he said that he spoiled his daughter rotten. The parents would say their daughter was full of love and life, and she was fiercely loyal, and at times she could be absolutely hilarious. One of Dave's fondest memories is when Skylar was a very young girl, he was home taking care of her by himself. And that morning, as he's looking after her, she asks him if he will participate in one of her trademark tea parties. And so David, the ever-dutiful father, walks over and says, "Of course, I'll participate in your tea party." And he sits down in this little tiny pink chair, and his daughter, who's got her ballerina tutu on, she's across the table and she's all smiles, and she sits down in her little pink chair, and she hands him this little plastic teacup. And so he takes the teacup and he sees there's water already inside of it. And so he sips the tea inside of the cup and he says, "Oh, it's so good, honey. You did such a good job brewing this tea." And Skylar is just blushing. She is so happy and so thrilled that he liked her tea. Later that night, when Mary came home from work, she goes to her husband, Dave, and says, "Hey, how did it go? How was it looking after Skylar today?" And Dave would tell her about all the things they did, including their big tea party. And he would tell Mary that, this time she actually put water inside of the teacup, so it was actually like a real tea party. And Mary stops him and goes, "Dave, Skylar's not tall enough to reach the faucet. How could she have put water inside of those cups?" And it turned out Skylar was using toilet water to fill the teacups. Fast forward to 2012, and on the night of July 5th, 16-year-old Skylar Neese had just finished a night shift at the Wendy's restaurant, and she just got home. She walks through the front door of her family's apartment, and as soon as she gets inside, she tells her parents she's really tired, she wants to go to bed. And so she hugged both of her parents, she told them that she loved them, and then Mary and Dave watched their daughter walk down the first floor hallway, and then they watched her open her bedroom door, go inside, and shut it behind her. The following morning, Mary and Dave both had to work, so they were up early, and Skylar was not up. She was still in her bedroom, her door was still shut, and so they assumed she was just going to sleep in. And so Mary and Dave, they make breakfast, they're chatting, they're kind of doing their morning routine, and then when it was time to go to work, they decided, let's not bother Skylar, she worked late last night, let her sleep in. And so the parents, they leave without seeing or talking to their daughter. Later that afternoon, Dave would come home early from work, and he gets to the apartment, he goes inside, and it's quiet. Now, Mary was still at work, but Skylar at this point really should not have been asleep. It's like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so he's thinking, she's got to be up around here somewhere. And so he yells out to his daughter, "Hey, I'm home. Where are you? What are you up to?" But there was no response. It was just silent. And so he walked down the first floor hallway towards his daughter's bedroom, and he saw the door was still shut. Now, she only kept that door shut when she was sleeping. And so he's thinking, okay, I guess she must still be asleep. This is really late in the afternoon. So, I'm going to knock on the door and see if she's okay. And so he knocks on the door and says, "Hey, Sky, it's late in the afternoon. You got to get up." But there was no answer. And when he listened to the door, there was no noise coming from the bedroom. And so he thought that was pretty weird. And so he knocked a few more times. He yelled out a few more times. And when there was no response, no answer, no sound, he opened the door up. And when he looked inside, Skylar was not in there. Now, Dave was thinking to himself, I don't think my daughter told me that she would be gone today, or at least not right now. And he's trying to think, did she say something? Was she meeting someone today? And he couldn't think of it. And so he just pulled his phone out and he called his daughter, but she didn't pick up. So he called his wife, Mary, and Mary's at work, and Mary picks up, and Dave asks her, "Hey, have you seen Skylar, or do you know where she is right now?" And she would say, "No, I don't know where she is. Maybe she's out with one of her friends." And so after Dave hung up the phone with his wife, he wound up calling one of Skylar's very closest friends. Her name was Sheila, and she had known Skylar since they were in second grade. They were practically inseparable, and he had a good relationship with Sheila. And so he just calls Sheila, and he says, "Hey, I haven't seen Skylar. She's gone right now. Do you know where she is?" And Sheila would say, "No, I'm sorry, I don't, but I did talk to her last night, but, there was nothing unusual about our interaction interaction. It was just normal texting about, normal stuff. And so Dave said, okay, thank you. Well, if you could, can you please try to get in touch with Skylar? And if you do get in touch with her, please tell her to get in touch with us. Or if you hear anything about her, please just let me know. After Dave hung up the phone with Sheila, he kind of stopped and just looked around his daughter's bedroom and thought, maybe there's some clue in here about where she's gone. And at first glance, really nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But when he walked around her bed and was looking inside of her closet, he saw the mesh screen that should have been mounted on the outside of her window was in her closet. And he's thinking, why is that in there? There's no reason for it to be in the closet. And so instinctively, he just turns around and walks over to the window that this screen is supposed to be on. And when he looks down at the bottom of the window, he sees it's open. Barely, just enough where you could maybe get your fingernails underneath the window and pry it open. And so Dave reaches down and opens this window all the way. And because there was no screen on this window, he just stuck his head all the way out the window. So his head is outside of the apartment. He's just kind of looking around, looking for some explanation of why this screen had been removed and put in her closet. And he got his explanation when he looked straight down and saw on the grass outside, just several feet below this window, because this is a first floor window, there was a bench, and the bench clearly had been moved there recently. For Dave, even though he had never heard of his daughter sneaking out of the house before and really didn't think that was something she would do, he's looking around thinking, okay, the evidence in her room and now outside of her room really indicates that that is exactly what she must have done the night before. She must have snuck out. But as he's processing this, he's also thinking, okay, well, if she snuck out of the house last night and then, snuck back into her room, why didn't she replace the screen on the window? And why didn't she close the window all the way? And then this morning, before she left to go wherever she went, why didn't she go outside and move the bench from under her window back to where it was supposed to go to avoid suspicion? Why didn't she do that? And then it dawns on him that his daughter must have snuck out the night before, but not come back yet. She's still out wherever she went. Dave was very concerned. However, he's thinking maybe there's a better explanation. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions. Maybe she didn't sneak out. And so he calls his wife to kind of just talk with her and figure out what they should do. And they decide, you know what, this is concerning, but let's just give her a couple of hours to turn back up again. I'm sure she's fine. And so they begin to wait. And then at 4 p.m. that evening, Wendy's, the restaurant where Skylar worked, called Dave and said, hey, have you seen Skylar? She was supposed to work today and she didn't show up. She didn't call. It's very unlike her. What's going on? And this was the tipping point. Dave and Mary knew something had to be wrong, and so Dave called the police.
Ballen County 911, do you have an emergency?
I have a 16-year-old daughter who apparently snuck out of her room last night. She has not been home, hasn't went to work, can't get a hold of her from any of her friends. I am scared to death.
Has she done this before?
No.
After Dave got off the phone, he and his wife began kind of frantically figuring out what they should do. While the police are out looking, should we go out and look too? Or should we stay here in case she comes home and, maybe she's hurt, maybe we can help her if she gets here. And so they're having this really difficult and stressful conversation when Mary's phone rings and it's Sheila. And so Mary immediately answers it, hoping for some good news about her daughter. But Sheila asks Mary right away, hey, has Skylar come home yet? And Mary says, no, she hasn't. And in fact, we just got off the phone with the police because this doesn't make sense. Something's wrong and we're getting the police involved. And so when Sheila hears this, she kind of takes a deep breath. And then after a little bit of a hesitation, she says, Mary, I gotta tell you the truth about last night. She would go on to explain that the night before, Skylar had snuck out of the house, and so had she, along with their other very close friend named Rachel. And Rachel was someone that Mary and Dave also knew very, very well. The three girls were kind of like best friends and totally inseparable. And so Sheila said the three of them snuck out, and in fact, they did this a lot, and they would drive around town and smoke marijuana together. But this was not the big reveal. Despite this being fairly shocking to Mary and Dave, this was not the big reveal. The big reveal was that when they went out and snuck out of their houses and smoked weed together, they would make sure they never drove their car. Whoever was driving would never drive directly in front of any of their houses because they were concerned that the noise from the car could wake up parents and then they'd get caught. And so the way they would do it is after they snuck out of their house, they would walk a block or two away from their house and then they would call or text the other two and they'd get picked up and they'd go do their thing. And then when they got dropped off, they would get dropped off a block or two away from their home and then walk the rest of the way. And so Sheila told Mary that last night, like so many other nights, she dropped Skylar off about a block away from their apartment, and then Sheila and Rachel drove off. So they did not actually see Skylar enter her apartment. So they don't know for sure if she actually made it home okay. And so this was obviously horrifying for Mary and Dave to hear, because it totally opened the door for their daughter to have been abducted during this walk from the drop-off point back to her apartment. And the street she was on was not well lit. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. She's potentially high on marijuana. And so it seemed like that was a very realistic thing that could have happened, as horrifying as it sounded. And so after Mary got off the phone with Sheila, she called the police and she updated them about what Sheila had told her. And then Mary and Dave met up with Sheila and Sheila's mother and began searching the immediate area around their apartment in hopes that maybe, she fell somewhere and she's trapped and she just needs to be picked up or helped in some way. But after searching for several hours and knocking on dozens and dozens of doors, nobody saw anything, nobody knew anything, there was no sign of Skylar. And so as this group is totally down, they don't know what to do, they feel totally helpless, they know the police are out looking for Skylar, but they want to do something and they don't know what to do. And that's when Mary remembers there is a security camera on the outside of their apartment building that is looking down at the road. And so right away, the four of them literally run back to the apartment building, they go inside, they find the security manager, they explain the situation, and sure enough, he pulls up the footage from the night before, and the footage they see doesn't make sense. Sheila had dropped Skylar off on that corner, kind of out of view of the camera, at around midnight. But at 12:30, so 30 minutes after she's been dropped off, you see this unknown kind of generic looking car pull up right in front of the apartment complex. And then Skylar comes running across the lawn, goes right up to the car, opens the back door, hops in the back seat, shuts it, and the car drives off. Even though this did not solve the mystery of where their daughter was, because they had no idea what car this was, who was driving it, or where they were going, Mary and Dave still felt relieved, because from their perspective, it seemed like their daughter had willingly got into this vehicle. Whoever it was, whatever they were doing, she had gotten in on purpose, which meant she probably was not being abducted, which was their big fear. Over the next couple of days, the police analyzed this footage and tried to get information about this car, but the footage was so grainy, they couldn't do it. However, the police were telling Dave and Mary, hey guys, I'm sure Skylar is going to show up any day now. As much as you may not want to believe it, that your daughter is capable of running away, it is fairly common for teens to do that. They'll run away and then, a couple days later, they'll pop back up. And so I'm sure that's what's going on with Skylar. She chose to get in that car. And so I'm sure she will choose to get back in touch when she feels comfortable. So a couple of days go by and the parents haven't heard anything from their daughter. And then a couple of weeks go by, still nothing. And then a couple of months go by, still nothing. And this is all despite the fact that there is a massive search happening led by the police, and locals in Morgantown have put flyers up everywhere that have pictures of Skylar Neese's face everywhere in town and in neighboring towns. It was like you could not go 5 feet without being reminded that this girl is missing. Have you seen her? If you have, give us information. Despite the amount of publicity this case was getting, no one came forward with any meaningful information. It was like Skylar had just vanished and no one had a clue what happened to her. Her parents were obviously devastated that they had no idea what happened to her, but they were kind of holding on to this idea that, maybe she did run away and maybe she will eventually be in touch with us. But by December of that year, so 6 months after Skylar had gone missing, no one had heard from her, no one had seen her, no one had any idea where she was, there was no new leads. And so people were starting to feel less and less optimistic, and the case was starting to kind of go cold. And then on December 12th, something totally unexpected happened that changed everything. On that night, Rachel, the other friend who had been there with Sheila and with Skylar on the night that Skylar had vanished, she has a full-blown nervous breakdown. In fact, it's so bad that she's screaming and running around and she's punching her family members, and her mom actually calls the police on her.
I have an issue with a 16-year-old daughter of mine. I can't control her anymore. She's screaming. She's running through the neighborhood. Give me the phone. No, this is over. This is over. Hurry up.
Get away from us.
No, she just gave me a block. Oh, gosh. Hurry up, please.
After this call was made, the police show up to Rachel's house and they take her away to a psychiatric hospital. And then several days later, when she was released from that hospital, she went straight to the Morgantown Police Department. She walked inside and said, I gotta get something off my chest about Skylar. Apparently, whatever it was that she had been keeping secret had just been too difficult to keep inside. It was quite literally driving her crazy. And so the police said, okay, great. And they brought her into an interview room. They sat down and they said, okay, what do you got for us? The following has been pulled from what Rachel told police. Back on July 5th, 2012, Skylar came home from that night shift at Wendy's. She goes inside her family's apartment. She says goodnight to her mom and dad. She goes into her bedroom and she shuts the door, and she's laying on her bed. She's on her phone. She's not going to bed quite yet. And as she's laying there, she starts getting text messages from Rachel and also from Sheila asking her if she wants to sneak out that night. Now, Skylar didn't want to, and she said as much because she was actually hurting. She was mad at her two friends. According to some of her other friends that went to school with her and Rachel and Sheila, the three of them were totally inseparable, but lately, kind of the few months leading up to when she ultimately disappeared, there had been tension in their group. It seemed like Sheila and Rachel were getting very, very close and kind of pushing Skylar away, and Skylar was starting to pick up on it. It was little things like Sheila and Rachel would show up to school in matching outfits, but they wouldn't tell Skylar beforehand, kind of leaving her out. Or whenever they posted selfies of the three of them, Skylar was always relegated to the back or kind of in some other way obscured to make sure she was not the focal point of the picture. It was just very obvious that they were deprioritizing Skylar, and it was really hurting Skylar's feelings. And so it seemed like her way of standing up to them and kind of telling them that she was upset was to turn down their offer of sneaking out and smoking weed with them. But over the next couple of hours, Skylar would eventually say, okay, fine, I'll come with you guys. I'll sneak out and we'll go smoke together. Just before 12:30 a.m. on July 6th, Skylar gets off of her bed. She walks over to her window. She lifts it up and she pulls the screen off, and she walks over to her closet. She puts the screen in her closet and shuts the door to the closet. And then she walks back over to the window and crawls out and lowers herself down onto the grass below. And then she walks over and grabs the bench and slides it over and puts it right underneath her window. And then she stands on the bench and reaches up and pulls the window down so there's just a little crack left so she can get back inside. And then she just waited by the side of the apartment looking out towards the road. And right after 12:30, this car, the unknown car on the surveillance camera, pulls right in front of the apartment building, and Skylar runs over to it, opens up the back right door, and climbs inside. This unknown car was Sheila's car. Sheila was driving, and Rachel was in the front passenger seat. It would turn out Rachel and Sheila lied about basically everything, including what time they picked up Skylar. So the three girls, they drive away from Skylar's apartment, and Sheila hops on a highway and starts driving northwest. Now, the girls did not immediately start smoking inside of the car. They decided instead they would actually drive to a location, get out, and smoke there. And the place they decided on was a spot they had smoked at before. It was a known hangout spot for teenagers. It was located about 45 minutes away, just barely across the border into Pennsylvania. It was down this kind of old country road that nobody ever went on. And so Sheila drives the car 45 minutes. She crosses into Pennsylvania. She finds the turn onto this old road. They drive down it a little ways until they're pretty far away from the highway, at which point Sheila pulls off the road onto the grass, parks the car. The three girls get out and they walk past the car a little ways down the path to a clearing on the right. There was a hill that went up on the right, and they would kind of sit on this hill looking downhill, and that would be where they would smoke. And so the three girls, they sit down, they're all next to each other, facing downhill. They're not facing each other. And Sheila, who is sitting all the way to the right with the car being over to the left, she pulls out the marijuana joint and she's about to light it, but she realizes she does not have a lighter. And so she asks Rachel and Skylar if they have a lighter, and they both pat themselves down. They're checking themselves. They don't have a lighter. And then Sheila says to Skylar, who's all the way to the left of the way they're sitting, so Skylar is closest to the car, she asks Skylar, hey, can you go in the car and get the lighter that I know is in there? And Skylar said, no problem. So Skylar, she stands up and she turns. Her back is to her two friends. And as soon as she starts walking, what she would have heard is the sound of her two friends standing up as well, and then loudly saying, 1, 2, 3. And on 3, Skylar would have felt 2 knives being plunged into her back by Rachel and by Sheila. In a panic, Skylar does not even turn around. She just starts taking off running towards the car, and she manages to run away from her attackers. But because of her grievous injuries in her back, she eventually slows down, at which point Sheila tackles her from behind. She gets her on the ground, she pins her on her back, and Sheila is trying to stab Skylar, but Skylar is doing her best to keep the knife off of her. But at some point, Rachel comes running up beside them, and between Rachel and Sheila, they manage to hold Skylar's hands down, at which point Sheila and Rachel began taking turns stabbing her in the chest and in the neck. The whole time, Skylar is trying to defend herself, but it's impossible with these two on top of her. And at some point, she just kind of gives up and she says, "Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?" But they don't give her a reason. They just keep on going. And eventually, Rachel stops stabbing Skylar, but Sheila doesn't. Sheila keeps on going until, quote, her neck stopped making gurgling sounds. And then once Skylar went still, Sheila stood up like it was nothing, and she and Rachel just walked away from her body back to the car. They went around to the trunk of the car, they opened it up, and inside was shovels, bleach, trash bags, rags. They had brought along a kill kit because they knew what they were going to do this night. And so they start by cleaning themselves off. They get the blood off of them and off of their weapons, and then they take the shovels and they walk a little ways off of the road, kind of into the woods, and they try to dig a grave, but it would turn out the ground was too hard. And so they abandon the grave idea and just grab Skylar's lifeless body and drag it just about 6 feet off of the road and kind of chuck it against a log. And then they threw boulders and sticks and anything they could on top of her body. They don't know if she's still alive at this point, so they're potentially dealing the fatal blow with these rocks and logs. They cover her up until she's totally obscured. And then the two girls just walk back up. They grab their shovels, they grab their rags, their bleach, they put it back in the trunk, they hop in their car, and they drive away. It would turn out Rachel and Sheila had been planning this for months. The reason? They didn't like Skylar anymore, and apparently it wasn't enough to just be mean to her and not include her in things. They actually needed to kill her. And so the entire night that they went out and snuck out, that was all planned. They knew Skylar did not want to come out and sneak out with them because they knew she was upset with them. And so they said whatever they had to say to convince her to leave her house and sneak out with them. And so she did. She snuck out. And when she got in that car, Sheila and Rachel had their knives already in their front pocket of their sweatshirt, ready to go. And on their ride to this spot in Pennsylvania, Sheila and Rachel acted like, "Oh, let's just go to this spot and smoke," when in reality, this was planned too. They wanted to make sure they were far away from Morgantown when they killed Skylar. And so when they got there and they walked down to their spot to actually begin smoking, Sheila and Rachel had intentionally not brought lighters, and Sheila had left a lighter in the car specifically so she could ask Skylar to go get it. Because the plan was, as soon as Skylar gets up to get that lighter and her back is to us, Sheila and Rachel had promised each other that they would count to 3 and then attack her. Ultimately, Rachel would be sentenced to 30 years in prison, but she'll be eligible for parole in 2023. And Sheila would be sentenced to life in prison, but she would also be eligible for parole in 2028. During their trials, Rachel was very remorseful and even gave an apology to Skylar's parents during the sentencing phase. Sheila, on the other hand, smirked during her trial for most of the time. She was smiling and totally making light of it. She said she didn't do it. She was totally not remorseful, and she did not offer an apology to Skylar's parents. She did, however, leave an unbelievably cruel message on Twitter. In March of 2013, when the police came out and officially said, "We have identified the remains in the forest in Pennsylvania as belonging to Skylar Neese," when that announcement was made, just a couple of days later, Sheila tweeted, "We really did go on 3. Sheila was arrested 1 month later. So that's gonna...
De wind fluistert zacht door de velden heen. De wolken dansen in de blauwe lucht. Het woud roept ons met zijn mysterie. De zonsondergang kleurt de horizon. Oh, natuur, jouw praat zo puur. In elke bloem, in elke boom. Oh, natuur,
to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please tell the like button you're going to upload 3, 4, even 5 times a week on your YouTube channel, and then drop it down to 2 or 3 times a week, and then 1 or 2 times a week, and then abruptly just go absent for 3 weeks straight. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 1 or 2 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballen.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions for our shop, go to our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballen. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username is the same for both platforms. It's just Mr. Ballen. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok, where my username is also Mr. Ballen. We also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts, where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We also have a Facebook page just called Mr. Ballen, where we post condensed versions of the longer episodes you see on YouTube. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.